The amount of pain and suffering that went on in the coal mines and factories during the Industrial Revolution was unbearable to both women and children. They had to endure awful work conditions that were sometimes very dangerous to their health. Well, in the early days, coal was brought up to the surface in very primitive ways. The boys and the fathers would go down, use a pick, and get at the seams of the coal, while the moms and the daughters would bring it up, putting it up on their heads in baskets, carrying it up long spiral staircase. Sometimes the band around their head would wear away their hair and make them kind of bald. In some mines, both the coal and the miners were brought to the surface in wooden buckets, which were pulled up the shaft. Sometimes the miners just had a rope to hold on to, and rope breaks and mistakes with a windlass often led to miners plunging to their deaths. In 1842, a parliamentary committee which reported on the mines found that many workers were working in the most appalling conditions. Not only did they work very long hours, but they were also hired at very young ages.
Children were a very big part of the coal mining industry. They were often used to pull sleds of coal and carts of coal through small tunnels, very long distances. A lot of times they used women for this area, or small young ladies, as young as 13. The chains would go across their body, and sometimes they would distort their pelvic bones and other features, which proved fatal later in life when they were of childbearing age.
Children as young as 5 years old were used as trappers to open and close underground doors in the mine to let the hurriers who pulled the loaded wagons get through. These children worked in the dark because their families were often too poor to be able to afford candles. They would be in the dark for up to 12 hours each day and often had rats scurrying all around them. If they fell asleep, they were beaten by the miners.
Children as young as 5 years old were hired as trappers to help the hurriers get in and out of the mine through these trap doors. A lot of times their jobs were difficult because they had to spend up to 12 hours in the dark with mice scurrying over them, and it was scary. Their families were too poor to buy candles for them to add light, so again, 12 hours in the dark. If they fell asleep, the miners would beat them, and it was just a very sad situation to be in. No place for children.
Well, children were often used or employed in the mine shafts for really very basic reasons. Unfortunately, there was a lot of orphanages around that they could draw a lot of children from. So those children were easily replaced. If an accident happened, unfortunately, another child would just be there to take its place. Another reason is that they were much more cheaper labor. The adults, of course, demanded more money. The cheaper labor for the children was very inexpensive for the people in charge. And also, the children served a really good purpose because they were small. They could get under the machinery, under the holes, and get into where they needed to be. The treatment of children in factories was often cruel and unusual, and the children's safety was generally neglected. The youngest children, who were not old enough to work the machines, were commonly sent to be assistants to textile workers. The people who the children served would often beat them, verbally abuse them, and take no consideration for their safety. Both boys and girls who worked in the factories were subject to beatings and other harsh forms of pain infliction. Children as young as 6 years old during the Industrial Revolution worked hard, long hours for little or no pay. They sometimes worked up to 19 hours a day with little or no break, and sometimes in extreme conditions worked up to 12 or 14 hours with minimal breaks. Not only were these children subject to long hours, but also they were in just dreadful, horrible conditions. Large, heavy, and dangerous equipment was very common for children to be using or working near. Many accidents occurred, injuring or killing children on the job. By the end of the 19th century, conditions had greatly improved. However, this was not achieved without the pressure from the workers themselves, who increasingly gathered to protest about their conditions of their work. These gatherings eventually led to organized self-help groups, which later became known as trade unions.